I'm going to ask each of the speakers to just introduce themselves, maybe reintroduce themselves, and give a little bit tidbit of information, maybe repetitive that they've done before, or if they wish, to mention something that maybe the audience is not aware of, such as your high bowling game or some other obscure fact. We'll hold that to, about 5 minutes or so. Give them a time to check to see if their mics are up and for them to say what they wish to say. Then I'm going to start pummeling them with questions. And I'm going to ask for interruptions as often as possible. I understand there are a number of physicians in the audience, and it would be great if we can get some questions from them. It doesn't even matter if you're an OBGYN. If you've got a question about how to give birth, I'm sure these 4 gentlemen will be able to give their 2 cents. So let us begin with John Reed.
Thank you, John. Well, my name is John Reed. I'm a physician. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Michigan and a master's degree there. I also did another master's degree in business administration at Michigan State. I worked on Wall Street actually for a while in the VC area of venture capital, finance and investments, that type of thing for a number of years. And then I decided that making money was not the most important thing in life. And so I decided to go into medicine. And I went to the Marshall University Medical School, and I was fortunate enough to be accepted into the residency program at Johns Hopkins. And I did my residency there and continued on there for a few years. Was associated with Johns Hopkins. I have worked with the Food and Drug Administration. I've worked with NIH and still do have association with NIH doing certain medical research. And I also do some consulting and contract work with the Department of Health and Human Services related to emergency preparedness, especially in the preparedness for potential outbreaks, whether man-made biological attacks or natural outbreaks of things like SARS and that kind of thing. As you know, I've been a long time member of SSE and been the treasurer for the last 6 years. And I recently, with the help of a number of other leaders in SSE, established the World Institute for Scientific Exploration, and that's now one of my main focuses. So, thank you.
John, quick question for you before you go on. What type of, now that you have the MD, were you involved in medical research, or were you involved in seeing patients of any kind for the benefit of the audience?
Oh, yes. In the first few years after medical school, I was involved in clinical practice, and but my main focus was in preventive medicine. That's my specialty, preventive medicine and public health.
Okay, thank you, John. And the other John. I may have to use your last names because there's 2 Johns up on the stage. John McMichael, please.
John McMichael. My training was at University of Maine as an undergraduate, and did PhD program at Oregon State. Have the honor of developing the first live virus vaccines for fish. That's a big hit in the world of fish, anyway. And postdoc at the Wistar Institute in Philadelphia, which at the time was and is still one of the leading places for some breakthrough kinds of medicine. Was a university professor for a decade or more. Headed up a large veterinary research lab. And for the last few years, I've been associated with a small company called Beech Tree Labs, where we focus on the discovery and development of new medicines for both humans and animals. And our modus operandi is to go through what are called proof of concept studies, which are FDA phase 2 trials. Then we license our products out to larger companies to do the final regulatory bits and get them on the market.
John McMichael, your beginnings, when you said you were teaching at Edinburgh, what courses were you teaching? Can you give us an idea?
Yeah, they were all graduate courses. Immunology, virology, neuromuscular physiology, and gerontology were my primary courses.
And they're all involved in humans, or were you doing animal physiology as well?
It was mostly human.
Mostly human. Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right, Richard, go get him.
Yeah, Dr. Richard Olree. I grew up in affluent suburbia of Detroit, and I went to a community college, and I specialized in cannabis tasting. I mean, just kidding. Got an associate's and wasting my time. And was trying to become a professional hockey player, and I took a pretty good slam and ended up in a chiropractor's office against everybody's belief system at the time. And after the treatment, I stood up and I said, I can do that. I says, I've been adjusting bones or whatever you call that since I was 14. And the guy said, well, you know, there's a bus going to a chiropractic college. And the next night I was on it. And then from there, I chose what chiropractic school I should go to so I could put myself through chiropractic school as a professional hockey referee. And in order to escape going to work, I had to get a Bachelor's of Science degree, which was very hard. And then I retired in life at 1981 when I got my Doctor of Chiropractic degree. I moved back to the hometown of 350 people of Hillman, Michigan, and I've been in practice for 30 years. I've coached 2 brothers, a sister-in-law, and my ex-wife through chiropractic college. In the course of that time, I started realizing that I had an intuitive sense that other people didn't have. I currently operate 6 days a week, 7 to 8 hours a day. Try not to work on Sundays anymore. And during this time, I started trying to understand what was going on with why it was so easy for me to see and perceive and do things that was never taught in any academia setting. I was very concerned about the healthcare profession. I wanted to know, what was an MRI and what is a CAT scan, and why chiropractors couldn't get onto it. And I proceeded within a 2-year period from 84 to 86. I opened up all the hospitals in the country for chiropractors to obtain X-rays, CAT scans, and MRIs. And believe me, I did it by bribing people. I did it the old-fashioned American way. And that worked out pretty good. And when I started seeing what was going on in the genetic field, I decided to become a self-educated geneticist. And when I started applying minerals and subatomic particles and overlaying this on the standard periodic charts and the genetic charts, I started looking at things completely different. And when I realized that all the minerals had mathematical values and I can break an amino acid protein, an amino acid down to an individual frequency, I started looking at the human body as DNA is a receiving device that creates 3-dimensional proteins. It uses vitamins and minerals to develop this construct. And I started looking at all the deficiencies and toxicities of vitamins and minerals, and particularly minerals in general. And it's just basically, it led to maybe 4 years of prayer wondering how I'd ever talk about this. And the next thing I know, I hooked up in the organic industry where I've been lecturing since 2005. I do license renewal seminars for MDs, DOs, and chiropractors. And I would prefer to do the organic farmers because they're interested in producing good food for humans, where the majority of the doctors, they just want to know how to make money, like everybody does. But I find the people that are trying to develop good food chains for us a far more satisfying group of people to try to educate into what it is that I'm doing.
Richard, horses are really big in my area, Gainesville, Florida, and Ocala, and we've had 2 Kentucky Derby connections. I wanted to know, because chiropractors on horses, very, very big in my area. Have you done any adjustments on anything but a human?
Well, I think the first thing I did is I hit a bird once, and then I worked on its neck, and it flew out of my hands. I went to a bar, and there was a goat that was part of the stunt, and I went out back and adjusted it because it had stage fright. And then when I was in chiropractic college, I dated a young lady who handled a farm with 42 horses. And I went and treated all the 42 horses. And I realized that horses speak in a language that nobody can comprehend. I experience telepathic communication, if that would be a loosely word, with horses. And yes, I've adjusted many horses. And it's interesting, the horse sense that people have. I'll say, do you have horses? Oh, yes. And I go, well, do you give your horse a selenium? And they go, well, you stupid? Of course I do. And I go, well, do you take it? And they go, well, should I? And it just never ceases to amaze me that farmers will give their animals the minerals it takes to make a living. And the horses are, in our county, all the animals have far better mineralization than human beings. And the farmers themselves don't comprehend that the minerals they're giving their animals, maybe they should take. So yeah, I've been involved with horses, and there is good selenium and bad selenium out there.
Down where I am, horses are more important than some people in some parts of Florida. Henry, please go ahead.
I became interested in science when I was in high school, and I studied chemistry, and I worked in academe in electrochemistry for about 30 years. And then I became interested in whether or not the Loch Ness Monster exists. And I found no help in the scientific literature, was ignored. So I became interested in why science studies some things and not others. And that led me to get in touch with people like Marcello Truzzi and Peter Stark, who were just setting up this society. And I also switched careers from chemistry to what was beginning to be a new field called science studies or science and technology studies that tries to integrate history of science, philosophy of science, sociology of science, anything that attempts to understand how science works or how it should work. And I had a special interest in the role of minority views or contrarian views. And that led me, I guess, a dozen years ago to realize that some people don't believe that HIV causes AIDS. And about 10 years ago, I read a book that made a statement about HIV which simply could not be true, and that led me to the primary literature, and that shows beyond doubt that HIV doesn't cause AIDS, and that caused me to read more about medicine in general and to come to the sad conclusion that the blunder of HIV/AIDS is not unique, but it represents trends that have been coming in science and in medical science for quite a while.
Very good. Thank you, Henry. What we're going to do is I'm going to begin with the serious questions. As I mentioned before, if anyone in the audience has a question, don't even bother raising your hand. I'm going to ignore you. What I want you to do is go up to the mic. And once I see you at the mic, I'll know that you have a question, especially because we may be moving off of that question. So if you can think of something that comes to mind as these questions come out and as they start responding to them, please go to the mic, and then I will call upon you because obviously I don't want to talk for that long. Let's see, my first question, let's start with Richard Olree. You whipped through your presentation faster than I've ever heard you do it before. What I'm going to ask you to do is slow down a little bit. I'm going to choose one mineral. I'm going to choose aluminum, and I want you to answer it in 3 ways. I want you to tell me what foods we're getting aluminum through, what products we're getting aluminum through. Then I want you to tell me the second part of the question is what it does inside your body. Clinically, what do you see when you see aluminum poisoning inside the body? And the third part to the question is how do you get rid of aluminum in the body? And I'm talking about a human body, not the horses.
Aluminum's a very fascinating mineral. This phenomena called acid rain takes aluminum from a solid to a liquid, and it gets into biological systems. And if you're an unhappy crayfish, it's because your gills are no longer being able to, they're not being told to transpire oxygen into the system. Aluminum has a natural affinity for phosphorus and phospholipids that coat the brain. In the city of Detroit, the last mineral that's added to the city of Detroit drinking water that's sold to all the suburbans is aluminum sulfate, and it's added there to make the water sparkle so you think it's clean. There's a group of lab rats that were unwillingly brought to Detroit, and they were culled, and they found aluminum in the brains within 3 minutes of drinking the stuff. Aluminum, I believe, displaces boron, and it causes havoc with transmission in the myelin sheets of your nerves. I do believe aluminum will accumulate on the blood-brain barrier, shutting down many of the molecular motors that causes excretion of waste products. The blood-brain barrier is energy and raw material in, and the excretion of the byproducts. And if you're not excreting beta amyloid and you're not getting rid of your byproducts, this 3-dimensional proteins turn into 2-dimensional beta sheets. So if you go to McDonald's and you like genetically modified food and you get a cheeseburger, the reason that cheese melts so easy, it's aluminum. I believe that the United States has some of the highest Alzheimer's rates in the country is because they've added silicoaluminate to Morton table salt back in the 30s as an anti-caking agent, and it's still added to table salt universally. And people cook with this table salt, and their food is aluminum laced. And I think that's a real bad deal. And the great aluminum detoxifier is cilantro. When you start consuming cilantro, Dr. Umara out of Japan came to the proclamation that Vietnam had the lowest Alzheimer's rate in the Eastern block, and they found out that when a person was eating these meals high in cilantro, they were excreting between 500 and 700 milligrams of aluminum per void. And I think aluminum is a very great metal to avoid, considering that it can play more havoc in your system than good. And again, cilantro is the great aluminum detoxifier. When you put aluminum chlorhydrate from your armpits into your armpits and your body absorbs it, it basically shorts out the nerve that goes to your sweat glands, so you don't create moisture, so the bacteria doesn't overgrow, and then you don't offend the guy sitting next to you. And I don't wear it, I'm sorry. I like my biome.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
In relation to what you were saying, Richard, you didn't mention Alzheimer's yet. Maybe you were going to get to it in relation to the aluminum problem. So can you enlarge on that in relation to the accumulation of the byproducts in the brain?
Well, in the 60s and the 70s, everybody wanted to blame aluminum. And then they kind of said, well, maybe that's not it, because there's a lot of other minerals that the brain needs to function properly. There's 27 selenium proteins in your brain. And if you look at when chlorophyll is created and you're taking carbon dioxide, sunlight, and water, and you're creating sugar and oxygen, when you go from that compound back to the basic compounds, this is a series of oxidation reactions. So an antioxidant is going to slow this down, and selenium is the master mineral of antioxidation. So I don't think if you just said, well, aluminum causes Alzheimer's, I believe that low iodine levels causes a percentage of stupidness. I believe that when you got selenium deficiencies, you're not able to control your oxidation reactions right. If you don't have your fatty omega-3s, keeping the inflammation down. All these diseases are not just tagged to one mineral, but if you want to hang your hat on aluminum, you can actually just say aluminum with neurodegenerative changes. Now, I had a case that came in, and it was interesting because his mother had passed on in a period of 5 days, and she was taking 10 aspirin a day to control her arthritis, and this 55-year-old man brought her woman home, and this house wasn't big enough for 2 women. And when his mom got upset, went to the doctor, and he put her on 10 Ecotrin pills a day. Well, instantly I knew there was something in Ecotrin that wasn't going to make me happy. So this has been 85, I found out that Ecotrin has 49.5 milligrams of aluminum per pill. She went from no aluminum consumption in her prescription medicines to just short of 500 milligrams. And she developed all the symptoms of dialysis dementia and was passed on within 10 days. And there was no other cause that I could account for the sudden deterioration. So people like to hang the hat and say aluminum. Well, it's a multifaceted, but I say aluminum detoxification can only greatly enhance the possible outcome of neurological changes brought on by aluminum toxicity.
I'd like to add something in relation to Alzheimer's. One of the areas, well, I didn't mention my major interest in anomalies when I was describing my background, but as a physician, I'm mostly interested in alternative medicines and treatments, and I'm very interested in in Ayurvedic medicine, which is the ancient Indian medical system, and I'm also interested in traditional medicine systems in China and elsewhere, where there are many treatments for hundreds and all kinds of disorders that are available and have been used for centuries, but are not are completely unknown to Western medicine. And in relation to Alzheimer's, I just learned today one of the SSE presenters from India, Dr. Sean. And I'm sorry, Sean, I can't pronounce your last name. Anyway, he was telling me that the food turmeric can also be used for not only treatment, but for potential prevention of Alzheimer's, and that this has been known for decades in India. So I think we have a huge amount to learn from other cultures amongst their foods that can be used for healing various things, such as the things that Richard has been mentioning. So we have to study and learn about the Ayurvedic system and the foods of India, the foods of China, and many other cultures to identify those things that can be used to replace the current paradigm of simply using pharmaceuticals to treat everything, and which is being pushed by the pharmaceutical companies.
Right, right.
Tom, I'd like to say something just
Please
quick
do.
about Alzheimer's. We consider Alzheimer's a reversible disease, and we treat it a little bit differently than what you've mentioned. And there's a fairly large pharmaceutical company that is locked into what we're doing. They're just finishing a multinational phase 3 trial now. But what we do is take just the first few amino acids of the beta amyloid protein, which is certainly implicated in that disease as a waste product that's, as you mentioned, simply is not getting eliminated. And by using those few amino acids as a therapeutic agent that we can give by a shot or a drop under the tongue or however you want to do it, we find that the Alzheimer's patient can become much more functional. And in doing some collaborative work with some investigators at East Tennessee Medical University who are expert in brain imaging, we find that from their work as a part of a blinded study for this multinational effort, that they could simply look at brain images and tell who was on the product and who was on placebo. The brain images themselves change. So there's certainly a point of no return with an Alzheimer's patient when there's so much destruction. But if the person can still walk and talk, we're convinced that they can be reversed.
This is amazing because that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you on page 2 of my notes.
Well,
So
India
thank
has
you
the
for allowing
lowest
me.
Alzheimer's rates in the world. They're less than 3%.
And that may explain it right now.
Well, with the turmeric being so prevalent in the diet, the mineral that's in the diet that prevents the aluminum deposits is boron. There's 3 forms of boron in turmeric if the boron's in the soil.
And we have, deficiencies of boron in most plants, as you know. And to turn the question over to Glenn. Whoop, is it working? I'm sorry, we need to turn that on. Yeah, there's a switch on the top. I'm sorry, forgot to switch it. Go get him.
That
Can you
works.
remember to mention the name and then your question.
My name?
Absolutely, Glenn.
Glenn.
Thank
Name's
you.
Glenn.
You got a last
Right,
name?
I got that, right.
Yeah.
So while we're on the subject of removing bad minerals from the body, I'm aware of a study where homeopathic lead was used to treat animals with excess lead, and they measured lead in the urine, and apparently it was able to remove lead from the body. Are there any similar studies with other minerals? Do you think that homeopathic aluminum would remove aluminum from the body, and what is the possible mechanism of action?
Now, who are you asking the question to, Glenn?
Anybody?
Anybody. Okay. That works for me.
That's basically the study of homeopathy. It's the hair of the dog that bit you the night before type thing. When you take things and you dilute them, the more you dilute them, the more powerful they become, according to the theories of homeopathy. If you're facing a life and death situation, I would prefer to probably do chelation therapy and drop the metals out of the system as fast as possible, and then replace the metals in the system that you need to do to rebuild. But the theory of homeopathy is dilution, and the more you dilute it, the more powerful it is, and yes, there's an entire science based on that. Do I use it? Yeah.
Well, may I add to that in relation to the science? In the early and late 1800s, up until about 1907, when the Flexner report was done, which was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, there were prevalent and well-known homeopathic medical schools throughout the United States. And the University of Michigan, which is one of the top 10 medical schools and medical institutions in the United States and amongst the top in the world, had a homeopathic medical school as part of that. But after the Flexner report in around 1906 or 7, I can't remember the exact year, all of the homeopathic medical schools that were at the Hahnemann Medical School in Philadelphia and many other places were shut down. And that whole area of science and research that had been done for decades, since the 1840s, was essentially suppressed and no longer investigated. So there is, and the thing is, throughout the world now, in Europe, homeopathic practices are legal and being done, and thousands of people are being treated there. And many governments throughout the world, including in India and other governments of the world, have officially approved the use of homeopathic medicine as a practice and therapy for people. So this is one of the areas, again, that Western medicine, and especially in the United States, has suppressed, and that we should definitely investigate for the benefit of humanity.
Very good, John, thank you. I do have a
would
question
like-
for Henry coming
I
up,
would like
but
to make a comment first, please, Tom, just for a
Oh,
second.
please.
Just for a second. And that is, if the focus of the panel is to be on the 21st century medicine, I think what Rich said and John both is important, but it needs to be carried a step further. You were talking about dilutions with homeopathy and how further dilutions become more powerful. That's only within limits. And it's important to remember about the notion of harmonics. And as you dilute, you get harmonics. And those harmonics are, think of a sine wave, you all know what that is. And you can go out further and further and further to the point where a true homeopathic physician might have a remedy that has nothing in it, supposedly, that is nothing detectable, except energy, right? And the argument is does water or saline, whatever the diluent is, does that have a potential for memory? In this case, an energetic memory that would be physiologically important. I think Ken Smith started to address that yesterday, or whatever the heck day it was, in his presentation with respect to the placebo response. But the idea is, if we're looking at 21st century medicine and trying to incorporate some of these notions from various cultures and so forth, is that although we have had a tendency in Western medicine since probably 1930s and 40s to focus on biochemistry as the ultimate answer to how things work, that's not how things work. Even though they do work, aspirin works great for doing whatever aspirin does, but a lot of that activity of aspirin is from energy. And if you can find the energetic signature of the therapeutic agent, that might be all you need.
And most drugs are taken with water, too.
That's a
Yeah.
very important point, because the basis of all the chemical reactions that are in the pharmaceuticals are energy based. You have to get down to the very physics, essentially, of the chemical reactions to figure out what's actually going on.
That is true. Definitely preaching to the choir here.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is speaking, I'm glad that John brought up the focus of this panel discussion being that of 21st century medicine. And I see a trend that hopefully we're helping to promote, and that is research in these areas of energy medicine to help explain what is going on, because I see the future of energy medicine, being the investigation and the determination of what is going on.
Energetic in nature, yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I just want to make a point, too, is that we're discovering this as an important aspect of the 21st century medicine, but the fact is that these concepts were discovered thousands of years ago in the Ayurvedic medical systems and in the acupunctural system of China. And so the Indian and the Chinese medical systems have preceded our current discoveries, perhaps in many ways, by thousands of years, and we should investigate those areas and do research in those areas to find out what's going on, because Western medicine still has not figured out what's going on with acupuncture. They haven't found any mechanism, because everybody's, in Western medicine you have to find the mechanism of the molecules or whatever, but we still can't explain how it is.
That is true, that is true.
Acupuncture works, but it does work and has been done so for thousands of years.
Excellent point, John. Sorry, I'll hold you up. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah. Oh, I'm Lorraine Berger. What needs to be done, what can be done to preserve the existence and the accessibility of alternative, in quotes, medical modalities? Because it seems like there are many attempts to eliminate them.
Well, you don't want
Once again, are you directing
Codex
it towards
Alimentarium.
anyone? Are you directing the question towards any speaker?
The panel, whoever.
Just the panel,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, the first thing you don't want to have passed is Codex Alimentarium.
Oh, absolutely.
Because that's just going to strip you of the rights to have any of these basic minerals for life. And then if you get them, you may be having to get them through genetically modified plants.
Richard,
Yeah.
explain what the codex is, if you would, please.
Oh.
Because you mentioned a lot of people probably don't know what it is.
Codex Alimentarium, I believe, actually may have started down back in the 60s, and it's worked its way up to the point that in Europe you have no ability to buy vitamins and minerals with any concentration. There may be, if you want to be a conspiracy theorist, to say that there's a pharmaceutical approach to eliminate all other forms of healing other than pharmaceutical drugs. And the Codex Alimentarium has been passed in many countries. It's been passed in a lot of countries, and they're, I don't know why they're not rioting. They must be on fluoridated drinking water or something. It basically is an attempt to eliminate any and all forms of vitamins and minerals.
Yeah, they want, the basic goal essentially is to get rid of self-medication with your own personal medications or supplements and that kind of thing, and to rely almost exclusively on pharmaceuticals, and so you'll have to be essentially prescribed to have many of these things that we now get over the counter, and it's rather insidious, I would say. And in answer to your question, how can we as a group here, SSE and WISE and ICEAM and the other organizations that exist, we are the ones that can carry the ball to make sure that these things are not suppressed, and we can do the research and make that research available on the internet and worldwide so that they can't suppress it anymore, as they have done in a number of cases. So, and then the literature too can be preserved too, because some of the literature has been suppressed. WISE, for example, has a literature preservation program, an anomalies literature preservation program that we've established, so that we're going to be collecting together and putting in libraries around the United States and in different parts of the world, collections of this alternative literature, so that it can't be gotten rid of, like some of the literature was, for example, Wilhelm Reich, where the FDA came in and burned his books and confiscated files and other things that they have actually confiscated from practicing physicians around the country as well.
I would like to address your
Go ahead,
question
John.
in just a little bit different way. I think there are two things that need to be done to get to the end point that you're after, and they are education and activation. The education is so much more easily done now with the web and the likelihood that laymen can become very well informed about what's going on, but the laymen have to get off their butts. That's the activation part. You can't just elect someone and say they're going to do the best thing for you. You got to grab their ear and beat the poop out of them to let them know what's going on. And we have a tendency, I'm afraid, to be far too passive, all of us, about it. It's not SSE or ICEAMS or someone, and those are great organizations, but we can't rely on them to do the job. Individuals have to get up off their butts and say, this is wrong, this is the way it should be done.
A couple of positive signs that about a decade ago, the National Institutes of Health started an Office of Complementary and Alternative Medicine, and there's increasing interest in academia and in practice in trying to study placebo. There have been a number of workshops held on that.
Yes, let me just add to that. The reason why the NCCAM that Henry referred to, the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, which is one of the 26 National Institutes for Health, National Institutes for Health, because there are 26 different institutes. The National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine is one of those 26. It was established because one of the senators, was actually a representative from Iowa, came down with a form of cancer, and he couldn't be, his cancer could not be treated or was not treated by any of the radiation or chemotherapy or anything, didn't respond. So he had to go outside the country to get treatment, which was effective. And in fact, he went to Montreal and got treatment from a gentleman by the name of Gaston Naissance. And And he came back, and because of the difficulty he, as a United States representative, had, he and Senator Tom Harkin from Iowa got together and said, we've got to establish some center or some institute within NIH to do this research on these alternative means of therapy.
All right, thank you, John. I want to move on to the next question.
So this is just a little question, and that is that I think there are certain buzzwords that end up really making some very good ideas unpalatable to the majority, and so we have the tyranny of majority experts. And the buzzword I'm thinking of right now is energy medicine, because energy is this word which I, as a physicist, have subsumed and we use it in a particular way. Is there another terminology that you can use instead of energy medicine that will describe the action that you're talking about? And I leave it open to whoever wants to answer.
Look at them all go.
I look at the alternative side of things is the weak magnetic energy. I mean, I take the word out and just call it weak magnetic fields. Those patterns are found throughout the body. They're reflected in iridology or foot reflexology or auricular therapy or hand reflexology. These patterns, there's no place of the body that's not connected, and this constant flow of energy that we have in our system, whether you want to call it an aura or a chakra or an acupuncture meridian, it's all forms of weak energy. Now, strong energy is when you get a blood test and see what calcium and magnesium and sodium and potassium and all your nitrogen-based testing and stuff like that. That what I'd call that is strong energy.
Well, John McMichael had mentioned the action of aspirin having to do with its energy as well as perhaps its chemical nature. What does that mean, and is there a word that could be used in place of that?
I would be disinclined to use a word other than energy for a couple of reasons. One is I think it's energy that's involved, and two, although most of us aren't physicists, most of us have an idea what energy is. And I don't think we have to define it any more than that for the purposes of getting information out. To answer your question about what type of energy it is, let me just give you a little bit of an anecdote. I think yesterday or the day before, whatever day it was, I gave a little talk about TML. That's a product we call thimerosal for the treatment of herpes infections and so forth. And I can easily explain the mechanism of action of that to the FDA or to some curious individual at a biochemical level. And the answer will be accurate and correct and wrong. That is to say that it'll be wrong in the sense that there's another level of activity, in this case of TML, which is at the energy level. And I think I might have mentioned this in the talk, it's not very often, you as a physician well know, that you can give the same dose of medicine by sublingual drop as by sub-Q infection, or sub-Q injection, and get the same result in the same amount of time. That just doesn't happen. That's just not the way things work. However, that's what we see with all of the medicines that we've developed with our little company. They all work like that. And so we have to think up some kind of lie to explain what's going on. And it's back to this notion of energy initiating a cascade that results in the desired outcome. Until we can better understand that energy, maybe that's sloppy terminology, but of interest is, some of you know the guy named Jim Oshman up in New Hampshire, who has written a great book called, cleverly, Energy Medicine. And I think that term energy right now is vital, no pun intended, to getting the word out to this other level of activity in the body.
Okay, thank you, John.
Well,
Garrett.
just something very short to that.
Okay, go
in
ahead.
answer to Garrett's question, I too would be disinclined to not use energy, because I think that your layman, your average person on the street will understand the meaning of that, and I think
Right.
if we make it more technical, they may not. So I
It's-
think that it would be good to
Yeah.
keep that, and we as intellectuals and researchers, we can maybe describe it in some other way with weak energy aspects and and
Right.
even go to below the proton and neutron level to describe what's going on. But I think energy medicine for your common person and your average person would be quite sufficient.
That is a good point. Vibrational medicine, things like that, they just don't have as much meaning.
You know,
for the
Tom,
common person.
nuclear magnetic resonance scared the pants off of people. When they started calling them an MRI, then everybody got one.
That scares the pants off of me, too. Next question. I'm so glad I came up with that list of questions. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Sean Lakshmanan, and just have some opinions on what we were discussing. Mostly people were talking about, the chemicals getting into our body and then treating or alternative medicines. But we have so many alternative preventive methods that you don't have to pay or do anything. You just have a process that you continue to do and you can cure yourself. And these are available in various organizations. It's free and everybody can do it, so that you don't make products and keep on selling. And when you try to sell one product, then you make money, then you want to find another product. So the money will drive everybody. So ultimately, everything should be free in this universe. And we have the potential and source. The ancient science has given, for example, in my culture, I didn't know, like we have to know the basics of science to understand healing. I don't want science. I just heal. For example, I did not take medicine for several, 15, 20 years until, my parents, after the Western medicine came, they gave some medicine some time, and I
Well, it's
was
funny you
not
should
aware.
mention that, because John Reed was actually talking about that, is that they had a lot of knowledge of this a few thousand years ago, but they didn't know why. And so that's kind of what you're mentioning right now, is you don't necessarily have to know the science, but you know that it works.
Yeah.
And now today, we're starting to get to the
Yeah.
point where we're understanding it a little bit better.
May I
Yeah, that's-
respond were you finished, John?
Yeah, well, so the point is, like, when you have preventive methods, and if that can be produced as a science, it can be given to the public.
Yes.
And of course, like through organizations that can do it freely for people to get the benefit.
Right.
Then we can even prevent. Of course, we can go for the level of medicines, whichever works out, like other alternative medicines. Okay, this is the first degree. There are even more than Ayurvedic. There are like herbal remedies. They take like one herbal and just it cures everything. So there are so many things hidden if you can learn the science, and this is a great forum that we can
Sure.
Okay,
present all this. Okay.
Let me respond to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Please.
In relation to the 21st century medicine and the future of medicine, I see preventive medicine, which happens to be my medical specialty at Johns Hopkins. I think that is one of the future trends, is prevention. The ancient Chinese medical system, and even today, is based on prevention, whereas Western medicine is a treatment and cure mostly of symptoms. But Western medicine has traditionally waited until someone had a malady of some kind and got sick, and then attempted to cure it. Whereas the ancient systems of Ayurvedic medicine in India and the herbal medicine system and acupuncture, well, acupuncture was a treatment of some problem, but the herbal medicine of ancient China, of which there are more than 150,000 different herbal treatments, was based on prevention.
Okay, John McMichael, go ahead. You said you wanted to make a comment.
Yes, relative again to 21st century medicine. I had the pleasure last week of talking to a member, or an individual who was a member of the board of directors of WellPoint. You probably know WellPoint. I think that's the second largest health insurance group in the country. And he was telling me that WellPoint is earmarking $1 billion to be spent towards decreasing medical costs. So that money is going to go to physicians and to groups who are looking more, as John said, at preventative medicine, techniques of that sort, with the idea of, it's quite mercenary on the part of WellPoint's side, because by having better health, they have to pay out fewer premium, or fewer payments to sick people. But I thought it was really encouraging that a company of that size is earmarking that kind of dollars for the very sort of thing that John's talking about.
It's only for money, though. They're actually doing it only to save money, so.
That's just fine.
Exactly,
It's going the right
exactly.
direction, yep.
At least it's a good thing to do, even though they're doing it for money.
I know. The intention may not be as pure, but I see what you're saying.
It's the
Dr.
right
Richard
idea.
Olree, go ahead. You have something to say.
I believe the Western diet, the food chain has been so fractionalized that we've broken the food products down and everything has to be reconstituted with synthetic vitamins. We have no iodine. 80% of the country is out of iodine. Now that's a prevention. At the turn of the century, of the last century, iodine was added to everything. It was added to bread. Now the iodine went out of the way. If you want to get a loaf of bread and you look at it, they have to put the vitamins back into it. Our children eat white flour with synthetic vitamins added back to it. If you want to do prevention, you have to start looking at whole foods again. The whole Western diet has just been stripped of minerals, stripped of vitamins. It's nothing but a bunch of carbohydrates. And then you take the gluten and it lines your intestinal tract. You go into malabsorption. We have the glycate phosphate problem that's stripping all the foods of all the minerals. We eat the glycate. It kills all the bacteria in our gut. Our immune system is completely stripped. So we go to doctors in good faith, and the doctors in good faith, the medical doctors, and I'm sorry, there's one medical doctor I know that's trained in alternative care, but I can't name many that even know what a vitamin is or a mineral is. I mean, the biggest thing that I see people coming in with, they're sick, they're out of water. They just don't flat out have any water. They think living on Mountain Dew and Gatorade and Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi and aspartame and Splenda just happens to be a normal way to go.
Do you have strong opinions about this? Or,
No.
Or no?
No.
Okay. All right. Next question. Carl, go ahead.
Yes, John, you mentioned the NIH's Department of Alternative and Complementary Medicine, and I kind of have a question, issue perspective, is that it seems like in that title, at least the latter part, complementary, is that the problem is that it leaves allopathic medicine is still the arbiter in control of, so they're calling the shots, and we invite a little bit of input from the other people, but our paradigm is still preserved, and therefore the fundamental analysis that needs to take place never really takes place.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. The people who actually control NIH, of course, have that current paradigm as part of their philosophical outlook, and so that will be there and probably will remain there in place. But it has changed a little, as Henry pointed out, and that is a good step forward, even though it took place in the 1990s, and it required a senator and someone not being able to be treated in the United States. There had been thousands prior to that, but when it was a senator, well, then people paid attention. So it is a step forward, although, as you point out, the allopathic physicians, through the AMA and through the revolving door of the FDA, with the pharmaceutical companies, are still largely in control of what goes on. But fortunately, there is a beginning, a first step.
And there was one point I forgot to add, I wanted to add, is that in the case of allopathy and homeopathy, they're fairly antagonistic. There is, I think, little middle ground in a lot of perspectives on disease between the two schools of thought.
Oh, well, there's a great deal of antagonism in the
Absolutely.
traditional physician areas. The AMA is very antagonistic towards any other system, essentially, other than the allopathic system and basically the pharmaceutical system of treatment of disorders and diseases.
Okay, John, what I wanted to say, I forgot to say this at the beginning. We will be stopping the panel at 5:50. That's actually the scheduled time for the panel to end. And I wanted you to know that I'm not going to go 90 minutes on the panel and let an hour and a half dinner go. So we will be stopping at the scheduled time, even though we started a little bit late. Just wanted to make that quick note. Please ask your next question.
I'm Vijay Gupta from the University of Colorado, and this question is for John. You are into preventive medicine, and you said many things about Ayurveda. I want to share with you and the audience the 3 pillars of Ayurveda. that everybody will appreciate here in this room. One is food. And the panelists here mentioned that in the United States, food is already fractionalized, stripped, it's junk food. So there's a problem there that needs to be fixed. People need to eat nutritious food. How do we get that message to them? Because it's a conflict of interest with the big pharma, with the big egg business, the Monsantos and all. So that's one. Number two, exercise. Without exercise, it's a no-go situation. And number three, stress reduction or relaxation. So on all the three fronts, if you look at the American population, they are failing miserably. So I can make a prediction standing right here, based on Ayurveda, that people are going to get sick. No wonder you are spending $2.3 trillion a year in healthcare or in disease maintenance system. So there is something very fundamental in terms of the existing paradigm. So the challenge is, John, to begin the education through research and the ancient science, which is already here, to communicate, to disseminate.
Thank you.
Yes, fortunately of those three, the last two that you mentioned, the exercise and the stress reduction are things that we can individually do. So I think in answer to your question, the education and the dissemination of knowledge and encouragement of people to engage in exercise, which has been going on, you know, in regular society and in a lot of educational venues, that is being promoted, which is a good sign. In relation to the food, and because we're almost at the mercy of the large, big ag and big chemical, you know, Monsanto you mentioned, and big pharmaceutical, big pharma, I guess they call it. We're almost at the mercy of them, or your average person is. But we can also, through education, I think, disseminate knowledge about that and what is going on, the truth behind the egg business and the truth behind the pharmaceutical business and the chemical business, and point out these things that Richard and John and Henry have pointed out in presentations of what is actually going on and the effects that they're having on our bodies. And I think that through that educational process and the research that we at SSE are doing, and at WISE and ICEAM and numerous other numerous other organizations, that we'll be able to eventually get the word out and help more and more people, but it's definitely going to take some time.
Yeah, because Henry Bauer's on 2 panels. I love the fact that you're giving him a break. He really does appreciate the break. Richard, you had a quick comment that you said you wanted to make on that.
If it'll be coming up, if you have any way of pushing anybody you know, the initiative of getting GMO labeling is going to start in California, and this has to pass somewhere, and I'm hoping California will be the first state. The average young adult eats 10 meals a week right now, and that's all they're eating. And the answer to exercise, if we could just send all the young adults a test that said stand up and sit down, that might be more exercise than they're currently getting.
All right, thank you. Next question, please.
Yes, I wanted to speak to the issue of nomenclature that Garrett brought up earlier. I think respect, patience, and translation are really key in what's happening right now. We're in a real transition space, and I think SSE, WISE, and all the other groups are in a key spot to help make that happen in a really big way. However, we do have to remember that there's a cross-cultural as well as an interdisciplinary aspect here that has to be respected. We need to be patient as we listen and learn about it. And we have to understand that there's a translation, even if it's in English, from words like energy to something else. And those of us who are already attempting to do that sometimes stand on our heads, so that when we're speaking to a group that's primarily made up of Western scientists, we use one form of language and try to translate. And when we speak to folks who are more familiar with these kinds of things in less than the Western science terminology, we kind of deal with that too. And I see this as extraordinarily important, and that's my biggest comment on what I've heard so far.
All right, thank you for that comment. Next question.
Good evening. My name is Manuel Rivera from Puerto Rico, and my question is related to what's been talking about right now, food and nutrition. And it's a follow-up question from the gentleman before me asked. I also think education and spreading the message is extremely important, but people like me who already got the message, we still have the problem of availability, of access to quality food sources. So my question is the following. Given that most of us have extremely limited options due to GMOs, pesticide, etc., could these limitations be overcome with urban small-scale gardening techniques such as hydroponic food production?
Well, I certainly think that that would be possible. In fact, in many large cities, there has been a trend in creating in unused urban spaces, whether it was a raised building or a house that was burned down or whatever, that they've converted these spaces into gardens, urban gardens, so to speak, and and people have started to do that. So that is certainly one thing that can be done, and it's actually being done in a number of cities around the United States. As far as hydroponics, as you know, the technology of that is not something that the average person can do. So they couldn't go out and start a hydroponic garden very easily without having a specialized technology.
They also usually lack the bacteria, the fungi that are in the soil too, and so that is kind of problematic. It is very difficult to do.
Urban gardens would probably be one of the helpful solutions, and of course for encouraging organic farming as well, which I think that Richard had mentioned and a number of the other presenters had mentioned as a means of overcoming the absolute dependence that we almost have on the items and food produced by the large agricultural businesses.
Okay, Richard first. You're going to comment, then I'll move over you to John McMichael.
Well, the farm to consumer direct is the way the small farm would like to operate. I would just love to go to my organic dairy farmer and buy A2 raw milk. However, the farm factories, the people that provide the majority of the food, are trying to make this completely impossible for you to do. Now, this came out yesterday. When you look at every one of those fruits you buy, and they have the stickers on them. Everything has a sticker on it. If that food sticker starts with an 8, it's genetically modified.
That's very useful.
All right, John McMichael, go ahead.
Yeah, I think with respect to the last question or comment, you might want to read some material written by a guy named Lynn Miller, who's probably one of the most prolific writers in this country about this idea of food to home and so forth. He's the editor and the founder of what's called the Small Farmer Journal, but he also goes around the country lecturing. He's got an awful lot of information available on the web. It's Lyn Miller, Lynn Miller, and he would give you some good ideas of how to go about tackling this whole problem.
All right, thank you. Next question, please.
Excuse me for
Whoops.
a minute, Tom.
Whoa.
I have a question around that. I don't have a watch, and John doesn't have a watch. And how much time do we have left? Because there are a couple of trends.
22 minutes.
22 minutes.
We are running out of time.
Right.
Yes.
We're in
Right.
good shape.
There are a couple of trends in 21st century medicine that I want to bring up that have virtually been unmentioned yet, and I want to get to them and make sure we get to them. So before the next person asks a question, may I give it just a very short...
You may give it a shot, especially if it involves Henry Bauer.
Okay, well, it certainly
I'm
involves something
comfortable.
that can be treated, could be, whatever, the cause of AIDS is. These things, this, what I'm about to say, could be used as a potential treatment for the disorder that is involved with AIDS or whatever other things. And that is the trend towards immune enhancement as a therapy for people and as a treatment for people, rather than the reliance on pharmaceuticals. And we've heard about the very important research of Bill Bengston, who's been doing research on immune enhancement. And from my perspective, I believe that immune enhancement, whether it is immune enhancement due to enhancing the placebo effect or enhancing the immune system through increasing the concentration of NK cells, which attack cancer and other forms of, or other types of cells and viruses and that kind of thing, or through the replacement of or the reinvigoration of the thymus gland, which involutes when a person is in their teens and continues to go down. This is the little organ that's in the chest that creates the T cells and many of the other immune cells of the body, and that throughout one's life that decreases. So if we can develop a means to reverse that involution, we would be able to maintain an immune system that we have essentially had when we were teenagers, and that's one of the reasons why people get sick more often, or one of the reasons why they get sick more often as they grow older, is because their immune system is naturally being depleted. So the research that Bill and many of the other people who made presentations here today is extremely important for the future of medicine as far as immune enhancement is concerned.
John, the number one mineral that's hyperaccumulated in the thymus gland is manganese. And the number one mineral that's sequestered in the soil, made not available to plants from glyphosate, is manganese.
So is there a connection?
Sort of.
Okay.
One of the things that
Henry,
yeah.
yes, please.
One of the things that is becoming more generally recognized is that the microflora in the gut are a very important part of the immune system. And a gay man who has been HIV positive for 20 years has remained healthy by a very careful probiotic diet.
Thank you for that contribution. Okay. John McMichael, yes.
Yep, just a quick comment about the immune response. There's real danger in hyping the immune response. And one has to be careful because an awful lot of diseases that we associate with the elderly are caused by an immune response that's out of control. And so these diseases have an autoimmune component, that is to say, the body's attacking itself. Everything from rheumatoid arthritis to even some forms of osteoarthritis and so forth. The immune response has one subpopulation of cells that are some people call suppressor T8s. And not for this to be a lecture in immunology, but the suppressor T8s do exactly what the name suggests. They are suppressor cells. They suppress other cells in the immune response. They are also the most sensitive cells we have in our body to environmental insults. As a consequence of that, as we get older, or depending on environments we are in, the suppressor T cells themselves can be suppressed. And the consequence of that is an immune response that can't shut off. My point in bringing this up is that one of the best ways to control the immune response and keep a healthy immune response is to avoid pollution. So don't eat, don't drink, and you'll be fine. Don't breathe either. But the real problem is not in the body there directly, it's what the environment is giving to us that is knocking off these cells that are so doggone sensitive. And whoever brought up, I guess, Henry, you're the one that brought up about the gut flora. Mm-hmm. You're right on target. And yesterday there was a little bit of talk in the group here about autism, which is truly a gut disease. That's not a brain disease. It's a gut disease. And it's the same sort of problem. And these gut diseases, whether the HIV or patient, or the AIDS patient, or the autism patients, or us that we think are generally healthy, it's this contaminated environment that's really knocking us out.
I think I've heard that about 95% of the diseases are gut diseases. Have I heard that, Richard, at Acres?
80%.
80? Oh, I thought it was, okay.
You know,
I'm shooting
Tom,
too high, 80%.
When you're born, you know, if your mother
And I was
opts to
born,
breastfeed you, you're given the first, anything that enters your mouth is going to be colostrum, and it's bifidobacteria longum, and you're given ample amounts of bacteria to digest your food. And I've seen a report that come out, and it says the older you get, the less bifidobacteria longum you get. And I compared that same linear graph with pancreatic amylase and human growth hormone, and it follows the same pattern. As the loss of the bacteria goes away, so does the production of our various hormones, just due to your immune system running out of bacteria that it can sustain.
Good point, good point. Let's go to the next question now.
I would like to return to the question of the energy. I think this is the proper notion, that energy. What I found using my model, I found a physical mechanism that biomolecules could store energy. DNA molecules, for example, have a ring structure of atoms, one oxygen and 4 carbons. It is known that in the quantum mechanics, when there is excited state, it falls to the lower level for nanoseconds or picoseconds. But I found that excited states in this ring structure, in fact, turns around and may stay much longer. I don't know how much, but let's say it could stay about 1 second. The DNA have maybe millions or billions of such structures. And if this stored energy is released suddenly, it's a huge pulse. But not only DNA. Most of the proteins also have ring structures. And those of the proteins mainly in the brain. So brain could have a possibility to store energy. And this is something that I think should be considered.
I think that many of the researchers who've made presentations here at this conference have addressed that and are attempting to explain the mechanism of the various medications and other things and how they work and why the modalities work from a physical and energy standpoint, because as has been mentioned earlier, that is one of the things that has to be done. It has to be, the basic understanding has to be at the very physical level and through energy levels, whether it's at the molecular, atomic, subatomic, or at other energy levels.
Aspirin, for example, has exactly such structure, ring structure. ATP.
Could you speak up a little bit? We can't hear you.
Aspirin has a structure. Number of medicine have a ring structure, for example, and also the ATP has also such structure, and in the reaction with the water, the stored energy could be released, and it could go to the proteins or to the DNA in the cells.
That's right. Good observation.
It looks like the small intestine has a set of bacteria that starts to help create the cycle that you're talking about, to create adenine triphosphate. The large intestine has a group of bacteria that are designed to help you absorb and excrete energy. So the sum total of the bacteria of your immune system is what gets you adenine triphosphate to become adenine diphosphate, adenine monophosphate. I believe we go back to the immune system, and the absorption of energy goes back to the bacteria, the 100 trillion bacteria in your intestines.
It's enormous energy.
Okay, we've got 12 more minutes left. I'm going to move on to the next question. Dick, go get him.
I was standing here earlier and congratulating Bill Bankston on the new energy that was discovered, which was presented yesterday, which is Bankston energy. And Bill, of course, took it all with a smile, as he usually does with me. And he says, well, you know, I don't think it's energy at all. I think it's information. And I started to think about that. Of course, I had thought about it before. I knew of Shannon's work on information, and I knew of people who had objected to Shannon's work on information. But I want to bring to the fore here a few observations which go against the usual concept of so-called energy. And the first is the fact that you can transmit an intention thousands of miles away instantaneously, and it can be recorded. I mean, this is one of the major findings of the pair work. And not only can it be recorded thousands of miles away, but it can be recorded off time. That is, I could call Brenda and say, you know, turn on the machine in 2 weeks from today. I'm going to make my intention right now. And when she turns it on in 2 weeks, bam, you get a reaction on the REG. Well, something that moves through time like that cannot be energy as we understand it. Electromagnetic energy just cannot do it, no matter how weak you want to make it. So there's something else involved here that we're just not grabbing. We are still so stuck in 1700 thinking. And what we really need to do is not to bring Ayurveda in or Chinese medicine in, those kinds of things, whole hog, and say, okay, we've got this other thing, and we've got this other thing. What we have to do is to recalibrate those ancient forms, which are extremely effective, to a modern era. And the modern era must shift from a mechanical view of things to something which would be much more functional, and we don't have the foggiest idea yet what it is. Now, I've worked with people who use radionic devices, for example, very effectively. What's a radionic device? Well, you put a little bit of something inside a well here in a machine, and you tune it in their various ways that they have of tuning, and it affects the dog, for example, who is thousands of miles away. And there's a huge amount of evidence that this works. No one knows how it works. I mean, there are many theories, but it does. And this is an effect that we have to understand. We're going to understand the fundamentals of how the human organism works. All the things that have been said here today are true, but they are functioning on a level which is still mechanical, no matter how people try and conceive of them today. This has to change.
All right, who wants to take that question?
Well, there's
Or
one,
comment.
there's one study. They're saying that not all subatomic particles travel at the same speed. CERN did a experiment, and the experiment got there before they sent it.
Yeah, how about that?
I mean, so it's not like they're on a highway and everybody's getting clocked at 70 miles an hour and getting ticketed for going 80.
That's right.
I don't know if anybody's seen that 5 weeks ago. The message got to the point where they sent it before they sent it. So,
And we saw that in the pair work too. Yes, information, if we'll call it that for the moment, it can move in that particular kind of way. And another thing I'd like to caution against saying, just saying to the public or even to ourselves, oh, well, this is energy medicine. I mean, how many times do we know in the history of science where, we've labeled something, and when we say, well, we'll just call it this for the time being, and a little later on, we'll be sure and adjust it and change it. But that old thing sticks, and people begin to think in that kind of way. And we're still thinking in 1700 terms.
But if we don't know what to call it, see, that's where the problem is. You just said that it's undefinable. So if we've got a new medicine, which is what you're proposing, as we all understand, to be, but we can't define it right now, then what do you do with the public, who is certainly not at the level that we're at right now, either higher or lower?
And they're so dumb. They'll never understand. That's why we don't tell them about UFOs.
So
Can I respond to
Please, John.
what Dick was saying? Dick made some very important comments, but like you were suggesting, Tom, we have to have some term, and the present term, as perhaps with the stigma and the other undesirable aspects of the term of energy medicine or various other forms of medicine, it is something that can be used to communicate. And even though energy medicine is not perhaps fully explained, and all the mechanisms that work, we have to use some term. And I don't think that people would accept the term of informational medicine very readily. And so I think we're stuck for the time being with energy medicine until, like someone suggested earlier, coming up with Garrett suggested coming up with a different term. So until we get to that term that is understandable to the common public, I think we're going to be stuck.
Well, it's a slippery slope.
Yes, I know. There are very great risks, as you point out, Dick, and so we just have to be careful.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Hello, I'm Bob Patterson. I got a different view. I'm a biomedical engineer with 50 years. I'm the full professor in the medical school at the University of Minnesota. Now, the #1 killer in the United States is heart disease. And Henry, I'm going to address my comments to you, but just make a few brief comments. So, not infectious disease, like you said, we pretty well got it under control. Not perfectly, but it's good. But these internal issues, heart disease. Now, so you raised some good points, so I want to address the very explicit questions. You're right, with the elderly, blood pressure goes up. Are you suggesting when blood pressure goes up for elderly people, they not be treated with drugs? The number two issue, and let me ask both questions, you probably will
I'll
answer.
forget the first one.
Okay.
Since there's no question about the fact that blood pressure normally increases with age, hypertension, something you should treat, should be defined in an age-dependent way. For example, 50% bigger than what's average or normal for that age. And anything else shouldn't be treated. Why would you treat it?
Because people die, there's data. I won't get that. The second question, in the United States, obesity is a big issue. Two issues, same thing, blood pressure and diabetes with insulin. We shouldn't treat diabetes because it's a natural occurrence with obesity, and what about blood pressure?
There are two different kinds of diabetes.
Type 2.
Type 2 diabetes, it's not clear how that is diagnosed, whether it's diagnosed correctly, because there are several different ways of measuring blood sugar. And it's not clear at all that the way that blood sugar is currently being tested for on people accurately diagnoses what is a disease as opposed to natural variations. Because your blood sugar varies throughout the day, it varies according to exercise, it varies according to diet, and one needs to find out what is natural for particular people. I mean, the present tendency to say that everybody should have blood sugar at 100 or 120, cholesterol at this and so on, there's natural variation of human beings. We have different genetic predispositions. There's a village in Italy where the average cholesterol level is 350 and people live to a ripe, healthy old age without hardening or narrowing of the arteries. The present tendency to average everything down is simply based on an erroneous concept.
I'm dealing with blood pressure and blood sugar. I'm not dealing with cholesterol.
Okay.
Doctor, what's the number one cause of preventable death? I mean, you got gunshots, you've got car accidents, we've got suicide. What's the number one cause of preventable death?
Well, cardiovascular disease is number one.
No, I said preventable.
Well, let me answer that.
Okay.
There's a lot of things. I should lose weight, exercise, but the reality is in the population, we're not doing it. So what's best is not being done. So as a physician, you can treat blood pressure, you can treat with insulin, you can treat blood sugars. You're right that we should be exercising, we should lose weight, and all these other things are very good. And I don't think the basic medical community denies that. But you look at the weight of the population, it's going up really quick.
Well, most people go to medical doctors, and I don't believe they're doing such a good job of educating their patients because the number one cause of preventable death is prescription medicine. I'm sorry, doctor. It wasn't a personal attack.
Can I respond? to this?
John, one, you can respond,
Okay, well,
and
first of
two,
all-
we can't take any more questions. Thank you very much.
Wait
Go
a
ahead,
minute.
John.
What do we have left?
We've got 1 minute, so go ahead. I want to make sure
Well,
people get to
I
dinner.
think that- Well, I think the points that Bob made are very important. And also the points that Henry made are important too. The problems with allopathic medicine and current medical practices have to be changed and improved, okay? And research has to be done to verify the better methods that Henry may be suggesting. But in the meantime, In answer to Bob's question, I don't think that anyone should suddenly stop taking any of their medications that they've been prescribed. And that's one of the things that Bob had asked in his original question. And from a medical standpoint, you know, until we find something better, you know, we have to depend on our current state of knowledge. And so, you know, those of you who are listening to the lectures that are being presented at this conference and to the comments that have been made, you know, by the panel and anywhere else should not discontinue their medication based on any of the research results we have, because it's research results, and until there is some type of proven better method or medication, then we have to rely on what is currently available.
Okay, that's going to have to be the last word. I would like to thank all of you for showing up at our first of two panels.